Hello, government students. Today we're going to be doing our last set of notes for Unit 4, Civil Rights, Equal Justice Under the Law, Notes 4.3. Your essential question: how has the court system been impacted by civil rights? So, in the United States, we are a heterogeneous society. Our population is very diverse and it's changed over time. So, since the mid 1960s, we've been admitting record numbers of immigrants into the United States. We have large populations of African American, Latinx, and Asian American populations in the United States, and women actually consist a greater population of men in the United States. With that diversity, we have a history of prejudice in the United States as well. So, our Constitution did create a white male dominated power structure. Remember, when they created the Constitution, the only people that were allowed to participate in our democracy were wealthy white males over the age of 21 years old. So, our government has been historically reluctant to yield a full and equal place for minorities or women in the social, political, and economic aspects of life. Discrimination against African Americans often receives the most attention when we're talking about US history, and that's because African Americans are the second largest minority group in the United States. They began their journey in the United States as enslaved people, and they've been victims of consistent and deliberate unjust treatment from 1619 up until today. Most of the gains that America has made about equality and civil rights have come out of efforts made by and on the behalf of African Americans. Latinx Americans are also another minority group in the United States fighting for equality. So they are actually the largest minority group in the United States and the most rapidly growing. In California, we actually had discrimination against Latinx students. Hispanic students were placed in separate schools based on their ethnicity until 1945. We actually had a case in California against Orange County because in Orange County we had schools that were for Latinx students and schools that were for white students. And they were separate, but of course they were not equal. Cesar Chavez and Dolores Huerta, you probably learned about in your US history class. These two co founded the National Farm Workers Association to promote better working conditions for Hispanic and Filipino farm workers in California and across the Southwest United States. The LGBTQ community has grown rapidly in their civil rights in the last 50 years. So, in the United States, actually up until 1973, homosexuality was classified as a mental disorder by the American Psychiatric Association. So, that's why that term homosexuality isn't really used by the LGBTQ community anymore because it was something that used to be a term that deemed them to be somewhat mentally ill, which is very outdated. And of course, we don't think that way anymore. But in California in the 1970s, actually, we had something called Proposition 6. So, as you'll learn about in our next unit, we have propositions that are on the ballot every time we go to vote. And these propositions are pretty much like laws that Californians get to vote on. And in the 1970s, 1978, on our ballot, we had a ballot measure called Prop 6, and this would have banned gays and lesbians from actually working in any school in California, even so far as to say that anyone who even supported the LGBTQ community would be banned from working in the schools. Luckily, this did not get passed by the voters, but I mean, you can imagine it's pretty crazy that this could even be on the ballot in California. The LGBTQ community has gained many of their rights from the Supreme Court. So, in the last 5 years alone, 2015, we had marriage equality come from the Supreme Court. When that happened, that evening, there was lots of celebrations outside of the Supreme Court building, and the White House, President Obama went ahead and put up rainbow lights on the White House here, which a lot of people were very upset about him for doing. He didn't paint it or anything; these were just lights for one evening, but a lot of people were upset that he did that. And something that just happened just a couple months ago in June of 2020, the Supreme Court actually just ruled that it is no longer legal to fire someone for being LGBTQ. Yes, that did just happen this year in 2020. We had to do that because we still had, even though we've had marriage equality for the last 5 years, we still had 33 states where it was completely legal to fire someone for being gay. So we did have a Supreme Court case about that. Now that is no longer able to happen in the United States. But there are still many more things that the LGBTQ community is fighting for their civil rights with. Of course, trans rights are being fought for across the United States. 23 states can still deny housing to anyone who's LGBTQ. So, if you're trying to get a house or rent an apartment, they can ask you if you're gay. And if you are, they can deny housing to you. 29 states also allow conversion therapy for minors. So, if your parents know you're LGBTQ, in 29 states, they're allowed to send you to often religious camps to try to convert you to being straight, which generally just results in at least psychological torture for these children. And it's still legal in over half the states in the United States. And 16 states still have no hate crime laws for LGBTQ people. So a lot of rights they're still fighting for. Women do make up 51% of the United States population. However, they do on average earn less than men. Women also make up about 30% of our Congress and about 25% of our state legislatures. They are also underrepresented in corporate management in the United States. So, this number here shows you sort of the pay gap, the wage gap with women. White women make on average 77 cents to what a white man makes. African American women, 64 cents to what a white man makes. And Latinx women make about 56 cents for every dollar that a man makes in this country. So we have this theory called the glass ceiling in the United States. So the glass ceiling means that there's sort of a barrier to advancement. It's this invisible barrier, but we know it's still there. So women and members of minorities, they can see the top, they can see these highest levels, but they can't quite attain them yet. That's that glass ceiling. Now, one of the Supreme Court cases, in case you watched this film for extra credit, if not, you still have a few days that you could do that. It is on Google Classroom. The Supreme Court case that Ruth Bader Ginsburg fought her first Supreme Court case as a lawyer. She went and testified during this Moritz versus Commissioner of the IRS. So it was actually a tax law case that said it was unfair to deny tax deductions to male caretakers. So this was a man who had never been married, and he was taking care of one of his elderly parents. They were elderly, they were sick. He was trying to get the tax break for that, but they said that this tax law was actually written for women who were taking care of people, not men who were taking care of people. So women would have been able to get this tax break, but he couldn't because he was a man. So she was saying that it's not fair to deny him this tax break on the basis of sex. RBG would go on to use the 14th Amendment to fight for equal rights, to try to break down these laws that were different based on gender in the United States. And a lot of our Supreme Court cases that have to do with different civil rights have used the 14th Amendment's Equal Protection Clause that says that citizens are protected equally under the law in the United States. The only mention to sex in the Constitution is the 19th Amendment, which forbids the denial of the right to vote on account of sex. Other than that, we do not mention sex in the Constitution. Of course, in US history, you learned about segregation in the United States. So, segregation is separating one group from another. We had Jim Crow laws in the United States that were passed in the late 1800s after slavery had ended. And this was the legal process to separate minorities from the white population. They established what they called separate but equal facilities, and this was upheld by the Supreme Court in 1896. There was a Supreme Court case, Plessy versus Ferguson, and it said that separate facilities were legal as long as they were equal. So as long as you have a African American school and a white school, or Latina school and a white school, and they're the same, then it's fine to separate people based on race. But of course, we know that separate but equal is never actually equal. So this it got struck down by the Supreme Court in 1954, the Supreme Court case Brown versus Board of Education. So this established the ability to start desegregating the schools and integrating them instead. So it integrated the schools through the 1950s, 1960s, even up to the 70s in some places. Now, a lot of places around the United States still have what we call de facto segregation, which is segregation that exists even though no law requires it. It looks a little different here in California. Actually, Sacramento is the most diverse city in the United States, so we look a little different than a lot of places in the United States. But a lot of places across this country are very dominant of one race or the other. Civil rights acts in the 1960s to try to fight back against these discriminations. 1964, we have the Civil Rights Act, which prohibited discrimination based on any person on the grounds of race, color, religion, national origin, sex, physical disability, in any federally funded program. But sexual orientation was not included in this. We had another Civil Rights Act passed in 1968 that was regarding housing. So, this was trying to prevent them from segregating based on housing, not to be able to deny someone an apartment or a house based on their race. Well, affirmative action programs started to get passed in the 1960s to try to make a positive step to remedy all the past injustices and discrimination against minorities in this nation. If you paid attention in your US history class, you learned about all these different minority groups and all of the massive hurdles that they had to overcome in the United States to try to gain equality. So, affirmative action tries to require that employers take positive steps to overcome these past discriminations. It's a positive effect in order to do that. But some people disagree. Some people said that if you are giving people a leg up based on their race, then it's actually what they call reverse discrimination or reverse racism against people who are not minorities. So there was actually a case that went up against the UC system right here in California in 1978. Someone claimed that they did not get into UC Davis based on discrimination, reverse discrimination, or reverse racism. So we did stop the ability to be able to use race as a factor in making decisions for college applications or for hiring. But we actually have this very issue on the ballot in November. So, in about a month, we will vote on California's Prop 16. That's one of the things we're voting on, November 3rd, 2020. This would actually implement affirmative action programs again. So, this would permit government, schools, the ability to make decisions regarding race, sex, color, ethnicity, national origin in order to address diversity. This is actually a constitutional amendment to our state constitution, and it would repeal that amendment. So it would give us the ability to use race or sex, ethnicity as a factor. If a company, let's say, was trying to have more diversity in their workforce, this would give them the ability to do that. So we'll see if it passes. Citizenship in the United States. A citizen is a member of a state or nation who owes its allegiance to it by birth or naturalization and is entitled to its full civil rights. In the United States, we can either become a citizen by birth. So, if you are born in the United States or on any of the United States territories, then you are automatically a citizen. So, that means anywhere within the 50 states and also any of the territories that we have around the world. Places like Puerto Rico is a territory, Guam is a territory, or anywhere where we have a military base. I was born on a military base in Germany, but because it's an army base, it's technically still US soil, so I was still a citizen by birth. And the 14th Amendment, remember, guarantees citizenship to any person born within the United States. But you can also become a citizen by blood. Okay, so if you're born in a different country, but you're born to an American citizen, to at least one American citizen, you can petition for citizenship that way. You can also go through the process to become a citizen of the United States. This is called naturalization. It's a legal process in which a person becomes a citizen of another country sometime after they are born. So this compromises a test. And you have to pay some fees to do it. The loss of citizenship. Expatriation is the legal process in which a loss of citizenship occurs. It is a voluntary act. An individual cannot have his or her citizenship taken away for breaking a law. It's not like they throw you in jail and they take away your citizenship. You do not lose your citizenship for taking a law. sorry for breaking a law. But denaturalization is the process by which citizens can lose their citizenship involuntarily, and that's if they did something like commit fraud when they were filling out their paperwork or taking their exam, if they cheated on it to become a citizen. If they used any sort of deception and it was discovered, then they can lose their citizenship that way. So Congress does have the exclusive power to regulate immigration. That's been problematic over time in US history and changes drastically based on who our president is. In 1965, we had over a quarter million immigrants come into the United States each year. Deportation is the legal process in which undocumented people are legally required to leave the United States, and this has increased dramatically in recent times. And we've had some new laws that have come about to try to protect people who have immigrated to the United States. We have DACA, which is Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals. This was passed in 2012 under President Obama. DACA has allowed nearly 600,000 unauthorized young immigrants to live and work here in the United States. So, DACA is specifically for childhood arrivals. So, if you're brought to the United States before the age of 17, then you can apply to be part of DACA. So, DACA makes sure it really ensures that we aren't deporting anyone who was brought here as a child. So, if you think many people were brought here as young babies, this is the only country they've ever known, the only home they've ever known, and people were being deported before DACA and being returned to a country that they did not know anyone. They often didn't speak the language, and they were young adults and they were being deported back to these places. And so this was to protect the people that were brought here without their consent. They were brought here as children. They had no say. So as to protect all those people. That's what DACA is. The DREAM Act is development relief and education for alien minors. The DREAM Act really provides college benefits for students who are brought here as children as well. So if you're a dreamer, you came here as an immigrant when you were a child, and you can apply to get in-state tuition without being a citizen of the United States. So it really helps out with financial aid benefits. This grants conditional residency, um, permanent residency after you meet further qualifications, lets you get a driver's license in some states, and lets you get a work permit. So you can qualify for DACA if you were brought here. Oh, I'm sorry, I said 17. If you came here before the age of 16, sorry about that. So 16, you have to either be in school, you can get a high school diploma, or serve in the military, and you can get it. You can get a work permit, you get a social security number. It helps you with student loans, all of those things. So DACA can really help out people who are brought here as children. And of course, we do have a crisis that's happening at the border today. So we have thousands of people that are coming to the United States seeking asylum, and I need you to know that is a legal process. So seeking asylum is the legal process where refugees come to the US border and they ask for safety and protections in the United States. People come here as refugees if there's some sort of events happening in their nation where they are no longer safe. They're no longer allowed to express who they are or feel safe from violence, things like that in their nation. So they're coming to the United States and they're asking to be let in. It is a completely legal process. You surrender yourself at the border. You are not coming here illegally. You're not hopping over fences or doing anything like that. You are coming to the border and you are surrendering yourself and your family, asking for asylum. Then it goes through a process with an immigration officer, and you have to file paperwork and prove why you need to come to the United States in this capacity. The current debate is about whether we should allow these people come to the United States, as we have since we began ourselves as a nation, and also what's happening to these children and these families once they get here. So as you can see, some of these pictures, pretty tough conditions that these people are facing. We have had a lot of allegations of sexual assault against these children that are here, a lot of violence against the women. In the last couple of weeks, some women are reporting being forcefully sterilized. So, definitely a lot of traumatic things happening at the border, and it needs further investigation, but it is definitely up for debate. And it's a huge deal in the presidential election right now. And the last thing we're going to talk about in our unit on the judicial branch is jury duty. So, jury duty is something that you will all probably experience at some point in your life. It is an element of citizenship, and this is the courthouse here in Woodland. So, this is probably where you will go once you are summoned to go to jury duty. So, once you turn 18, you have the ability to serve on a jury. This is one of the most important responsibilities of a US citizen. I know people complain about jury duty, people don't like jury duty very much, but if you ever get arrested for anything, you want to make sure that you have a jury of peers, a jury of people that look like you, that understand where you're coming from, that would give you a fair trial. Okay. So it's important that you do that for other people because you might need people to do that for you one day. So it's really important for all of us as citizens to do this for others in our society. So if you are 18, they will either do it based on your voter registration or where your driver's license is or where your ID is located. That's where they'll get your address. You will get a summons in the mail a few weeks before your actual date that you have to show up. They will give you a date and you will have to call the night before. They'll let you call at 5 o'clock the night before to see if you need to report. And if you do have to report, you go the next morning, you go to the courthouse, you park at the courthouse, you show up, you go through security, and then you have to wait for the process of jury selection. You can serve on a jury if you're a US citizen, if you're at least 18. You can't be incarcerated, obviously, but you also can't be on parole or probation, and you cannot be a registered sex offender. The average trial lasts about 3 to 6 days. These are what the jury summons look like. You'll get something that looks like this in the mail, depending on which county you live in. You can be required to serve on a jury up to once a year, so once every 12 months, but it usually happens far less often. And then you would only actually get selected to be on a jury if both sides agree on you as a juror. So they actually both get to interview you and ask you questions on both sides. And if they both agree that you would be a good juror for their case, they can pick you. So, like I said, these are what these look like depending on what county you live in. They'll look something like this, and you'll get these in the mail. And just so you know, I have been registered to vote for almost 12 years now, and I have only ever actually gone in once. I would love to serve on a jury because I'm a government teacher and I like this stuff. But every time I probably get one of these forms every 2 years. And every time I've called the night before, they usually don't need me. I've only ever actually gone in once. And the morning that I got in, they actually canceled the trial. So it doesn't happen very often that people actually get chose for jury duty. And then here I just have a video clip from the movie Marshall. This was about Thurgood Marshall that came out in 2017. And this sort of just shows you how the jury selection process goes. So, how both sides get to interview you and see how this goes. Now, this was a case that was about an accused man of sexual assault, and this was in Jim Crow segregated South, historically speaking, times. So they are both trying to decide here who they want to pick on their jury. So I'm going to go ahead and play this for you, and while you're watching, just write your summary at the end of your notes, a couple sentences.
Jury selection, gentlemen. Clerk, call the first veneer person.
Lester Gilman of Norwalk.
Mr. Gilman.
Mr. Gilman. In this case, a colored man is accused of raping a white woman. Could you be fair in deciding such a case?
I think so.
No further questions. Accepted by the defense.
To tell you the truth, I don't know much about them, the colored. We don't have too many in Stratford.
Excused.
I'll be honest with you. I don't like the colored. Seems to me they're always getting into some sort of trouble. I don't think much of Hebrews either.
Excuse me?
Well, you're one of them. I figured.
Thank you for your candor, Mr. Wright. No further questions.
Counselor?
Your Honor, we move to have Mr. Wright excused for cause.
On what grounds?
He just admitted he's biased.
Mr. Wright, you're a law-abiding citizen, wouldn't you say?
That's right, Your Honor.
If I instructed you that the law requires that you set aside your bias, would you obey my instruction?
Yes, I'd have to.
The challenge for cause is overruled. You may use a peremptory challenge.
Your Honor, with all due respect.
I've made my ruling.
Excused.
Mr. Ellis, you agree, do you not, that as a colored man, you could not fairly pass judgment on Mr. Spell?
No, sir.
You agree you could not be fair?
No, what I mean is, yes, if he's guilty, I'd have to convict him.
I'll use a challenge.
Your Honor, I object.
Grounds?
You can't use the challenge to discuss.
I heard that, Mr. Marshall. It's a peremptory challenge, Mr. Friedman. The state may use it for whatever reason it wants. Mr. Willis, you have 4 left. The defense has 1.
Every single time they discriminate, we're going to object. Recognize it now.
Mrs. Richmond, you reside in Greenwich?
Yes, Mr. Willis, I do now.
And if the state proves its case, you could convict the defendant?
Yes, of course I could.
Thank you, Mrs. Richmond. That's all I wanted to know.
Mrs. Richmond, I notice you have an accent.
Really? Here, I thought you were the one with the accent, Mr. Friedman.
Fair enough. Mrs. Richmond, where did you live before moving here?
Raleigh, North Carolina.
But now you live in Greenwich.
Yes, that's right.
If you live in Greenwich, you must have heard about this case.
It's all anybody talks about.
I assume then that you've come to some sort of conclusion regarding the defendant's guilt or innocence?
You assume incorrectly. I don't have all the evidence, now do I?
Have you met Mrs. Struben?
In passing, at parties and community events. I believe we belong to the same club.
Do you really think then, Mrs. Richmond, that with all of these connections, the club, the parties, that you could really just set all of that aside?
I don't see why not.
Thank you. No further questions.
The state accepts, Mrs. Richmond.
Your Honor,
Mr. Friedman,
Your Honor, may we have 5 minutes, please?
Fine with me, Your Honor.
the court will recess for exactly 5 minutes, but we're not going to make a habit of this, are we, Counselor?
No, of course not. Thank you, Your Honor.